Welcome back to Spiritually Wired. I am looking forward to this episode for you today because I have Staci Millard with us. Staci is the owner, the CEO of Thrive Accounting. She's also the podcast host of Small Business School, and she is a wealth of information when it comes to building a successful business. The reason why I asked Staci to join us is that I really wanted to open up the conversation around money and spirituality. And let me just say that she did not disappoint. Staci gives us some practical, tangible ways that we can start to understand our money a little bit better. What is the one number that she really feels is the most important when it comes to, again, being successful financially with our business. But she also opens up the conversation to explore the link between our mindset blocks and our sense of self-worth, and really how important it is to have the willingness to look at the resistance that we have around money, around our finances. I absolutely love this conversation, and I can't wait for you to have a listen to it. Hi, I'm Renée Walker, a mindset mentor, speaker, and lover of all things spiritual. I believe that at our core, we are all spiritually wired for love, peace, success, and abundance. Here on the podcast, we're diving into mindset, wellness, and business, but always through a spiritual lens. Let's just say we're going deep, but we're keeping it light. So let's elevate your life from the inside out, one conversation at a time. Welcome to Spiritually Wired. Hey, welcome, Staci Millard. I am so happy to have you on the Spiritually Wired podcast. How are you doing?
Oh, Renee, I'm so excited to be chatting. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Good. So I was, as I was sort of, for me, reflecting on some of the topics that I want to bring to this podcast, one of the ones that I always feel a little bit of resistance around bringing in a spiritual environment is the topic of money, because for some reason, there's this disconnect that we have between spirituality and money. And I know that personally on my own, journey, the more and more I'm on it, the more and more I realize how the two are very linked together. That the way in which we think of money, our mindset around it, the relationship that we have with money plays a big role in what we manifest and the abundance that we bring into our lives. So I'm looking forward to this conversation because I wanted to, and I thought of you specifically because you are so knowledgeable when it comes to money and business and really sort of taking that practical approach that also has a lot of impact. So I'm looking forward to opening up this conversation. And I guess I'd love to start by asking you, Staci, what are some of the common money blocks that you see a lot of the entrepreneurs that you work with, the women that you work with? What are some of the common money blocks that you see?
Renee, I think this is such an interesting question because if I came back to it, money is just energy, right? And so I think where we are blocked with money is that it's a measurement of something to us. And so we think we're being measured on a scale. Mm-hmm. And whether it's, are we spending responsibly, or are we making enough? Are we getting paid enough? How does that tie to our worth? At the end of the day, I think our resistance to it is in being measured with a number of like in high school, this girl's a 10. That felt super uncomfortable. But that I think is what all money blocks relate to, is I just don't want to be measured of whether I'm good enough or not. because we don't inherently know. For most people, like the most spiritual people in the world say like we are made of love, and I feel like they're trying to convince the public like we are all worthy, you know, you're worthy on your own. And so I think that that's where money blocks come in. It's just like I don't want to be measured on that.
That's so true. And it really, like you said, the word worth, and really that's exactly what it comes down to. And just in our society, because the thing is, whether we want to or not, money is a part of the way in which we live and we function as a society. So we can't, you know, maybe some people have figured out a way to, you know, live somewhere, you know, where they don't need money. But for most of us, money is a reality. And so when we use it or see it as a way in which we measure our worth, I mean, of course, we're going to come across some blocks. We had in my Spiritually Wired membership, we had a coaching call last week, and it was so interesting how money was the topic of conversation, and in different ways for some business owners that are sort of feeling that resistance and the struggle around, I mean, it can be a difficult environment right now to make money. It's not necessarily easy. But then also for women who made the decision to contribute in their family in a different way, and they're feeling that measure of worth show up for them as well. But it's just two sort of different ways.
Yeah, and I think it's like it's really interesting because if you go back to like the barter system, you get rid of money and you have the barter system. I'm sure that the same things still existed. It's just it wasn't a count, right? Like at the end of the day, you can only sell something that's worth value to somebody else. And I think maybe that's what stings in business. So we think it's about money, but it's actually about like, what are we doing? How responsible are we being? Are we making good decisions? That's what we feel uncomfortable with. Like, did I make good decisions? No. I don't have any money left in my bank account. Like, ugh, I didn't make the best decisions. Or I'm trying to sell something and nobody's finding it valuable. That sucks, right? So yeah, money is the measurement of it. But at the end of the day, like, it's the more emotional impact of, am I bringing value to somebody else? And am I being a good steward of my resources?
That's a great question for someone who is listening, who may not be necessarily earning an income or money through a business, but that is a great question to ask yourself is, am I bringing value? And focusing on the value that you are bringing, whether it's in your business or in your family or, you know, society or in whatever way that may be.
I think it's interesting too, though, when we talk about blocks, what I usually find is the biggest block is an unwillingness to really take a deep breath, right? And it can be like, you know, from a body level, a nervous system issue where we no longer feel like our basic needs are met because money is like, it plays so many different impacts. Like it's got those questions that we just talked about, but it also serves our most basic needs of safety, security, food, housing, water, right? Like, and so from a energetic level, if our basic needs aren't met or we're worried that our basic needs aren't met, it's really hard to ask ourselves, like, what are my actions? How are they leading to the results I'm getting? And how can I change that? Like, we can't hear source, like we can't hear any of the messages we're getting when our nervous system is completely on high alert. And so usually what I work with clients on is, how do we bring some peace? Like, how do we just take a step back? Even if it's a few minutes, like, how do we just take that big, deep breath? And even if it hurts, how can we move past maybe our own judgment on ourselves and say, how do we do something different? So if we have a program and we're not selling it, right? So any of our online friends, it's like, if they're not selling it, then what I'm asking is let's take a really big, deep breath. Like, the people who you do know, what is valuable to them? Maybe we're not selling them the right thing. Like, we're not talking to the right people. Do we want to go find a new group to talk to? Do we want to sell something different that they already were like, oh, they want that? I'm good at that. I can do that. Right. But it's that moment of clarity and that centering where now you can hear what's going on around you that really brings in the change to get to where you want to be. Because when you're vibrating and you're not listening to anybody, physical, spiritual, anything, like you're operating almost in your own void. But business is relationships. Business is this movement of energy and money, and like just a back and forth between people. And we're not listening. And that's where most of our problems come from.
Okay, you are speaking my language. I love this because it's so true. The survival piece, right? Money is part of our survival, we talked about. But the fact of what you're really inviting people as well to do is that we can't make money decisions from an unregulated nervous system, which is where oftentimes we do, because now it's like the panic sets in of like, oh my goodness, like this is not selling, I'm not making enough money to pay, my expenses this month or whatever it may be. Maybe it's even, more than that. But making decisions from that unregulated, dysregulated nervous system state will never sort of serve you. So what you're inviting people is to take that deep breath, center yourself so that you can actually make decisions from a regulated nervous system. And that invites so much more clarity.
Yeah, and even like, how do you hear your own intuition when you're on level frantic, right?
You don't.
It's impossible. So I think like that is like the groundwork of learning how to regulate your nervous system, even amongst chaos. Because I think what we all know is we will never control life. We'll never make the perfect conditions. And I mean, even if you think that you have created them, they're probably only going to last a few minutes. Something else will come up. So it's like, how do we show up amidst all that? And showing up with that regulated nervous system, then from like a physical level, we get to make that better judgment. But also, I think that a lot of people, we work with a lot of spiritual clients, and they do have intuition on what they should be selling, who they should be selling it to, even just like their marketing. It's so interesting. My sister is in energy healing, and I'm sure she won't mind me sharing this, but it's so interesting. Like some days she gets a little bit overwhelmed by it all, and she'll call me and she'll be like, should I do this? Should I invest in this? Like, how should I go about this? And I'm like, I think you just need to go like meditate for a bit, use your tools. And she's like, yeah, I'm really in my head. Hey, I'm like, yeah. And then she knows exactly what to do. She comes back and she's like, yeah, okay, this feels good to me, right? And I think it's a dance, because sometimes what we're sold is that we should just do what's important to us. And this is where maybe some of the shame comes in, as people have listened to their intuition, or think that they're making decisions that are like from an individual level. They're like, well, I'm selling what feels good to me and nobody's buying it. But it is a relationship, right? So we have to hear ourselves, and then we also have to hear the people that we're selling to. So from a regulated place, you can do that.
Right. So having like the importance of also being willing to look at what you're doing, and also sort of what your clients are looking for as well. So it's like that dance between, yes, you are coming from an intuitive place, but also from a place of, okay, what is the value that I'm adding, and listening to what the needs of people are. I love, like you brought up your sister, and I mean, I know that for me, a lot of the clients that I work with are healers and coaches and creatives. And so all sort of people that are a little bit more on the intuitive creative side. So the money piece feels very challenging, because it's just not where their brain normally functions. While as you have people that their brain normally functions more sort of on that logical side, and maybe the intuitive piece is the piece that's a little bit more challenging. But I have found that for so many creatives and coaches and healers, they are so passionate about what they do, and they love what they do. But looking at the numbers is just not an easy thing to do, because it's almost, and I will raise my hand, I will admit that that is me. I can look at numbers with other people, but when it comes to my own thing, there's a disconnect, because I'm like, no, but I'm here to serve. I'm here to create an impact, to help. Yet I know that it's very disempowering to look the other way as well, right? There's something that's really tangible and important in terms of knowing your numbers and being willing to look at them. Do you have anything that you can add in terms of helping people who maybe feel resistance around the money side of their business or their life in general?
Yeah. What I'm going to say, I feel like you may cut, but if I got really honest, every client, so I'm looking at my very intuitive clients, right? Mm-hmm. We have quite a few of them. And the ones that I have that don't like looking at money all have a self-worth challenge that they have not gotten over. They might have gotten over it in other ways. Maybe it's like body-wise they feel good and things like that. But there is still something self-worth-wise and self-confidence-wise that they have not addressed if they are not addressing their money. And so that is like, that truth is something that I think you have to address. Is the longer that you say, no, I'm good, like I've got it all healed, like you're not going to look at it. You're like, oh, well, it's almost like a lie to yourself of like, I don't want to look at the money because I just want to serve people. It's like, no, we're scared. Like we have to admit that we are scared, and then we can start healing that. And what do we do when we're scared? Like we flip the light on. We take baby steps, we build a muscle to do, like stepping on stage is a thing for people, but they learn and they grow the muscle over time, right? They don't just like step onto a stage with 5,000 people. They start, talking to a small group and then a little bit bigger and a little bit bigger. So the same thing with money is you can start with small steps of just looking at your bank account. Then maybe you just keep track of your expenses. Maybe then you look at revenue. Like you just look at pieces. And then what we know about habits and positive rewards is you can start building in pieces, like set the tone, put some nice music on, pour yourself a bubbly drink, like, make it a pleasurable experience in all the other ways. Give yourself a reward for doing it. But we have to build the muscle, and it starts with small steps. But the very first step is just admitting why you don't want to look at it in the first place.
Yeah. I think it's so true, because when it comes to energy, and I mean, one of the things that I know to be true is that anytime there's resistance is there to teach you something, right? If there's resistance, then it means there's something there to look at it. We're aiming for neutrality. It doesn't mean that you have to be like, woohoo, yes, I get to do my taxes, or I get to look at my numbers. Maybe you never get to be that person who loves it, but the neutrality is important. Like anytime there is resistance, it means that it's an opportunity to grow, to learn something, to heal some aspect. And yeah, that requires being real and being willing to take a look at it.
I think though, like sometimes too, there's a resistance when you're hearing people suggest that like you just look at money. I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they're like, look, I didn't set any 2025 goals. Like it just didn't feel good to me. And she's really in a stage of like growing her business, and she doesn't want to be judged against some arbitrary goalpost that she's putting out. And I can understand that of like, I don't know if I can accomplish this. Like, I don't want to judge myself for failure every month looking at these goals and not hitting them. And so we talked about it. I'm like, look, I don't think it's always about money. It can just be about a measurement. Am I taking the steps in the right direction? Because we lose perspective very easily of like, are we getting there? And so for her, we just actually made a goal, because I'm like, well, what are the action steps that you would take? Like, let's say you did set a money goal, but whatever it is, what's your steps you have to take? And she's like, well, I think for me, I need to meet more people. I need to build my network. I'm not going hunting for a sale. That's not it. But I think when I go and meet people and I show up in who I am and confident in what I can serve, people will know me and they will want to buy from me. And so I was like, okay, well, we just need to set a goal of how many people you meet, right? Like, let's make a goal, and it's based on the action steps then, instead of that financial goal where the financial goal feels too far off. And it feels like just a judgment. And in that case, like, that feels ick to me too, of like, it's not really saying whether you did the right thing or not.
Yeah. It's that whole idea of process versus outcome, right? So if you feel maybe the number, and I love that you bring this up because I know that is often a challenge that I have personally, is the balance between the idea of surrendering, because I do believe from a spiritual perspective, right, the idea is that when you sort of align yourself with and like you're doing something that you love and you're serving and you're intuitively making the decision, there's something to be said for surrendering the outcome, because the reality is that the universe might have something even bigger in store for us, and the more sort of locked into what we think our outcome is, the more we sometimes like are wearing blinders and we miss opportunities because we're just so set on that. Yet, there's also something to be said for having tangible goals and taking action in a way that feels more measurable, so that you're not just all over the place too, because that's what can happen easily if you're not sort of on track. So do you find, is there a place for finding that balance between surrendering and also at the same time having some clarity, some direction as you're moving forward?
Yeah, I have to say, I think that the magic always happens when there's a mix of both. Like, we work with a lot of creatives and spiritually inclined people. So oftentimes I find that they really work, especially the first years in their business, they really work from a place of intuition, their creativity, their desire to do good in the world. And hunting down a sale feels for them like asking like, well, what can the community do for me? Instead of like, what can I do for the community, right? It's like not a flow. It's like almost like they're trying to take, so they really resist it. And I agree with that. When you're just like, well, where's my next sale? Or did I make this much profit? It's like, it's very aggressive and a lot of people feel resistance to it. So that's not what we're asking for. But the numbers can be such good guideposts that literally every week I have this conversation with another client who finally is like, okay, I'm ready to look at some of the numbers. And when they look at them, they're like, oh, I was feeling resistance in that area of the business, or that wasn't feeling good. And they're like, okay, now, like, well, yeah, like there was a challenge, probably a like relationship challenge, and financially the numbers were showing that to you. So when they mix the two of them, and they're able to be like, okay, this is what my plan feels like. And then they're like, well, what does that look like financially? There's like, every time it's a go, there's no resistance. It's like, right. But when they're resisting looking at the numbers, it's like, well, it's probably not right. So if they're making a decision, they're like, I'm going to hire that employee, but I'm not going to look at, I don't know if I can afford that. I'm not looking at the numbers. Like, there's a reason that they're like lying to themselves or not wanting to look at the numbers. They already know it's not a fit, right? Like in some form, they're denying it. The problem already exists. And so when you can couple the two of them, it's like, it just feels good. Like you just feel so open to the answer.
Yeah, it's like just looking at your numbers data. Like that's all it is. It's just data that's helping you. It's supporting your intuition. Oh,
yeah.
I'm loving this, Staci. Yeah. This is making me really excited because now I can look at, okay, for people who are listening, if there is resistance, then now we're shifting the perspective of your numbers are supporting your your intuition and your creative side. It doesn't have to take away from it. It actually is there to support it and to help you in making those decisions so that you feel more, as you said, more aligned and more feels better.
Well, and so Renee, I think that sometimes it's like we make our daily decisions on actions, right? So we're like, we decide to do this today, and then we measure ourselves based on money, but like we're almost talking apples and oranges, and then we're wondering like, well, why didn't we get the results? It's like, well, you didn't consider the money in the first decision. And so if you can release your resistance to the money piece, every single person that we work with, once they've released that resistance, they're like, oh, they're like, it's not about making millions of dollars. It's not about like, you can be as abundant as you want to, right? But it no longer holds that negative connotation. And then when they bring it into the decision making, it's just like, it's even hard to describe, but it's all of a sudden this flow of like, ooh, yeah, that client feels great. Like this team member feels great. You know, this offering feels great. And it's just this flow that they're taking the actions and it's getting the results because they considered what result they really wanted. Not just money, like obviously more aspects than just money, but they really thought about, well, what is my end goal? Like what we know about manifesting is you have to be clear on the end goal. And then with that clarity, you come back to like, what is a law of, like you need to do the law of action, right? So then you're literally bringing it full circle. But if you don't have the clarity on it, you're denying that piece and you're not bringing it back to where you are at this moment, then it just never comes full circle. It doesn't tie all the pieces in.
I love it. So when we talk about the idea of knowing your numbers, it's sort of like this catchy phrase that we hear. What would you say, like, where does someone start? What are the numbers? If we go a little bit more specific, because I know that's what you work in every day, what would you say are the numbers that people should know?
If I thought there was like one number that was most important, is understanding how much you've committed yourself to spending financially. So understanding like what are your monthly expenses to run the business and what do you need personally to be paid because of the lifestyle that you're used to, or, you know, your personal expenses that you have. And that number is the basis for like sort of everything else. Because if you don't have that number locked in, it doesn't matter what revenue you bring in or anything else, because it may just never be enough. You might be working harder than you want to. Like it just doesn't make any sense. So if you understand that, then you get to look at like, okay, well, how much money would I have to make in a month to be able to do that? And that clarity helps you decide of like, oh, do I need to make some changes in my personal life? Because I resist working that much. Like I don't want to work that much to have to pay for all that. Or maybe you make some changes with your offerings of, ooh, like that's going to be a lot of one-on-one clients. Like that I would have to work 75 hours a day. That doesn't feel good to me. How do I start bringing in other things that are a hell yes for our customers? I love delivering that. And it still helps me pay my bills, so that like it's just this fluid system where everything's in harmony.
Absolutely.
So that's like one number.
Okay, so understanding your sort of your monthly expenses and your monthly cost and what you actually need, because it can also sometimes be on the opposite where you may not even need as much as you think that you do. Sometimes, you know, it's the reverse. But I know at one point I was considering a brick and mortar studio, and looking at the numbers was a big awakening, like for me, and that the number of how much I had to show up was not aligned with the life that I wanted to have at this stage in my life. So but it was good, the exercise of going through it, because I always had this dream of opening a physical studio. And I mean, COVID happened and that sort of stopped that anyways. But it was really interesting to take a real look at the numbers and realize that even though I thought I had that dream, it did not align with my bigger life picture of how I want to live and the way in which I want to be with my family and all that.
But imagine if you hadn't looked at the number, right?
Yeah.
So like that's knowing what you had financially committed. And then you're like, ooh, this is forcing me to take these kind of actions daily. Yeah. And if you hadn't looked at that number, you would have been so out of alignment, forced to be there paying this bill every month that you didn't really like. You know, the reality is different than what we've desired in our head. We didn't maybe have the picture clear enough, right? Like I want a space, but I only want to work there X number of hours a week. It just invites you to create even more clarity, because now maybe you have a space with somebody else. Like the possibilities come into more alignment now that you've got more clarity on the picture, on what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely. And the only way is to, as you said, sort of have that willingness to be, and there's a certain, so from an energetic perspective, what I see as well is the responsibility. There's something around being, if we see money as being energy, then there is something around valuing it and being responsible around it that also, it's like when you love it, it loves you back type of thing. And it's the same thing with food, right? I'm always like, eat the foods that love you back. Like, to me, that is a way in which I can make healthier choices without feeling like I'm depriving myself. If I'm like, does this food love me back? And it goes for so many different aspects in our relationships and everything in life. But yeah, with money, it's the same.
Absolutely. And, I haven't met somebody who said like, oh, this was, great for my business, or that didn't feel good about the spending. Does that make sense? Like when it doesn't feel good, maybe it does in a moment and it's a quick hit, but then after the fact, we're like, oh, that didn't feel good. Like those are kind of the kinds of things that on the expense, when we're spending and not feeling like we're being good stewards of our money and we're not being responsible with it, that's the kind of things that people have like a block, or they may deny that they're living in that space because they don't want to admit that decision was very short-sighted. Does that make sense? I think at the end of the day, with all of this, like, I think it's about being okay to make a mistake, not to be wrong, but like to make a mistake. That we somehow think that we need to live in this perfect world where everything is actually, we grasp onto like, okay, perfection. Like, how do we look perfect? How do we have the perfect financial condition? How do we be perfect parents and perfect business owners? And it's almost like we've got this idea of something in our head or somebody who makes every perfect decision, and we're judging ourselves against that. Instead of like, to me, the most spiritual thing is understanding that everything is a lesson. Like, there's a dark to the light. Like, there's always going to be mistakes. We need mistakes to guide us, or something that, not even a mistake, but like something that if we look back, knowing what we know now, we would have done it differently. Right? So it's like we have to like really, really, really release that fear of being imperfect, because we actually are imperfect. So like, let's just admit that. We are imperfect. And so if we can let go of that unwillingness to kind of make a decision and then wish that we had made something different, knowing what we know now, then it's like we can actually just move through it. Like we could just flow through life, right? Like we say things like, what I'm thinking about is, I have girls that are 7 and 9. And so like right now I'm doing a lot of apologizing. And with parenting, they teach you a lot about the value of repair. It was like, well, what if we brought that lesson into how we dealt with money, right? If we really get down to it, we've always made money. We always will make money. We will always have another chance to do something differently. There's no chance it's lost. The same with parenting. I yelled this morning and I really wish I hadn't, and I can show up and say sorry and do better. And like, if we can bring that into our money decisions, it's just like that release of the fact that we are not going to be perfect, then we just get to flow through it. We get to apologize to ourselves and then just move past it instead of staying stuck on judgment of one decision.
Yes, and I could, I should have done this, or, and that's where sort of all of that guilt and shame over past decisions, because I'm sure everyone listening to this episode can think of some times where they made some bad money decisions, and then you carry that energetically as well. So I love that you're giving us permission to let go of the perfection, and it's okay to be messy, and it's okay to try and to course correct, and to really be willing to all we can do is do our best. And I love, because you've sort of you're bringing it to one of the questions that I wanted to ask you was, for you personally, what has been your biggest lesson that you've learned? So I'm assuming, we would, I'm sure, just assume, oh, she's got it all figured out and she's made every perfect decision moving forward. But have you had any big lessons yourself on your journey?
Way too many lessons. Way too many. No. Obviously they're all in due course. I truly feel like if I look back and you're like, did this one have a return on investment, or did it pay off, or would you have considered it a loss, right? There's lots of those decisions, and I used to hold on to them. At one point I took on a business partner. It was the worst financial loss for my family probably that we ever had, because I committed to paying somebody half of what the business made, and that person didn't show up. I was doing everything and not getting paid for it. And it cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I've made decisions like that, but I have to be honest, like at this stage, I don't know how many years, 12 years into business, and maybe just this stage of life and stage of spirituality, it's just like, that doesn't really matter to me anymore. Like, I know I've paid $10,000 for a course that at that time felt really aligned, and I thought it was going to be the right thing. And then, down the road it wasn't. Also, though, I make those decisions from a very regulated place, because they hurt a lot worse when they come from fear. When I'm gripping at like, okay, we gotta do this to make this money, and like it hurts worse and worse and worse until you learn to let go. So I think if anything, like the lesson that served me the most is just the letting go. And thankfully my husband doesn't beat me up too, because when you're a family and you have like financial obligations that you share, he's very good at not giving me more guilt than I already have.
Yeah. I love that you share that. Thank you for sharing that, because those are the lessons that you're carrying with you now, right? And in everything that you're doing. So it shapes us. Like, though we learn and we grow and we expand, not with all of our successes. It's actually all of the challenges, and every time that we fall down and we pick ourselves back up is where we actually are able to shape and to shift and to change and to learn in so many different ways. And so when we can really acknowledge and honor that, it's such a beautiful and important shift in perspective. So that there's so many takeaways for everyone during this call, and I'm so grateful to you. One of the questions that I love to ask is what spirituality means to you.
I, for most of my life, have had a really hard time defining spirituality. So I'm sorry that this is not going to be more polished, but I think at the end of the day, it's a connectedness. It's a connectedness amongst people, beings, places, energy.
I love it. I love the
like
word
connectedness.
Yeah, and that dance of life. That is so beautiful. Staci, I could go on because there's like a million questions that I also want to ask you. But I love and appreciate you being here. If someone wants to learn more about what you do, they want to connect, they want help with their business, where is the best way that they can connect with you?
Yeah, on Instagram is the easiest. I'm on as Staci.Millard, Staci, or Thrive Accounting, and we help people both of those ways. But I also have a podcast, Small Business School, if you're looking for like the tangible advice. But I really appreciated this conversation, Renée, because I was saying beforehand that we show up a little bit less about spirituality in our space, although it's like in our one-to-one conversations. And so I really appreciate the chance to go a little deeper today.
Yeah, no, it's one of those, I just find there is so much freedom when we can bring the two together and merge it. Because as I said earlier, I just have always seen the two as being separate. And now I love seeing the two kind of come together. And I think also for women, especially my generation, where there's a lot of secrecy around money. We grew up where women or where no one really talked about money. You don't know what people make, and it's just like this taboo topic that that needs to change. Right? We need to, as you said, sort of have that willingness to look at it. So I love that we're opening it up.
What I think is interesting, though, is that I think it's like anything else. Like when you talk about even like health, right? With friends, like there are some people who just don't want to know. So I think when it comes to money, that you need to find your people, the people who are kind of waking up to it, the people who want to know. And because I think it's important, obviously it's what I do every day, and we talk about it all the time. But I think too that if somebody's in a conversation, I think that there's a way to bring it up, because there's some people are just, they're not there yet. They're not on that part of the journey. And so right. I really think that there are a lot of people who are, and find those people, have those conversations. Like you're talking about money, and you're making this amazing outlet for people to listen to and connect with it. So like find those people and find those places that you think, okay, like some people who think my way are going to be there and are willing to have those conversations with me. And don't be disappointed if somebody's not on that part of the journey yet. Because I think right. like part of what we've talked about in today's conversation is like, it kind of comes from a place of a little bit of pain or suffering, or like it can be painful for people. So you kind of have to meet people where they're at. That's maybe another like portion of the connectedness that I talk about, right? Is just being able to witness Absolutely. Where other people are at. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, the importance of community, and in, even you sharing the, some of the lessons that you've learned, then it opens up where people are listening and they're like, okay, I'm not alone, right? Mm-hmm. Other people, so there's so much power in the vulnerability piece as well when it comes around money, because everyone sort of like is walking around and we all look at everyone else and we all think everyone else has it all figured out. And that's, money is one piece of that. It goes for every aspect of life. And so when you can be in spaces where people are willing to be vulnerable, it just frees up and opens up that conversation and the depth of connectedness, right? That you feel with those people. So yeah, that is a great reminder. Well, we are going to link your website, your podcast, your Instagram handle in the show notes. So if you are listening and you are looking for any support in your business, Staci is just such an incredible resource for you. So we're going to link your information. And I want to remind you that you are spiritually wired for love, for peace, for success, and yes, for lots of financial abundance. I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to Spiritually Wired. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to follow and leave a review. It really makes a big difference for the podcast. And if you're ready to dive deeper and join a soul-led community, come be a part of the Spiritually Wired membership. With weekly live lessons and a rich library of recorded classes, it's designed to support you every step of the way on your spiritual journey. We currently have a special offer where you can receive your first month for half the price. You can find a link in the show notes or come check it out at reneewalkerwellness.com. Until next time, remember to take some deep breaths. Remember that you are spiritually wired.